Hello, hello, hello. This is Danny Ceballos with Unleash Consulting and the Best Boss Bootcamp podcast. Welcome, dear listener. How wonderful to have you here, and how wonderful to welcome my guest, friend, colleague, have done amazing work just over the past year or so, especially around DEI work. So I'm just super excited to have Dr. Alejandra Mielke join us today. Dr. Alejandra, can you just say hi?
Hi, everyone. Happy to be here today.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Dr. Mielke, and then we're going to be talking today about what it is to work cross-culturally. What's the latest thinking around what it takes to manage and work and be effective in multicultural workplace in so many different ways. So I'm really excited about this conversation. So Dr. Mielke, Dr. Mielke is originally from Monterrey, Mexico. Dr. Alejandra Rodriguez Mielke moved to Austin, Texas in 2000 to pursue a doctoral degree in education. Dr. Mielke is now a highly respected diversity, equity, and inclusion and intercultural consultant, coach, and keynote speaker. With expertise in Latino Hispanic leadership development and intercultural solutions for cross-cultural organizations, she has dedicated her career to empowering Latinx individuals and fostering inclusive environments. Dr. Mielke does this work through her firm, Latina Power Coaching, where she provides executive and leadership coaching for Latina executives, and as one of three co-founders of El Puente Institute, which is dedicated to promoting organizational excellence and inclusive work cultures by recruiting, retaining, and nurturing Latino leaders in ways that respect and leverage their unique cultural values. Dr. Mielke, so wonderful to have you here. Is there anything else that you want to tell us about your background or what's going on for you right now?
Well, thank you for having me here first, Danny. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm just happy to be here and to be able to continue doing this work, what I've been doing for a long time. First, in the field of education. I work in higher education for a long time. And then I moved into the for-profit world. So I'm happy that I have the opportunity to continue with all these efforts that are so close to my heart. Thank you for having me.
Yes. And I know they're close to your heart. You and I have engaged in not only work with clients, but work with each other around deepening our appreciation and respect for not only each other, but how to manage. My God, what is it now? It's not even DEI, it's DEIJB. I mean, it's just getting more and more complex, as it should, and more nuanced, but in that the challenges are there as well as the rewards. So Dr. Mielke, I wonder if we can start off with, how can we best understand how diverse cultural perspectives impact the workplace?
Yes, thank you, Danny, for that great question. First question. Well, first we have to understand, and something that happened to me is very personal, obviously, because I moved from one country to another country. And I found that even though I was fluent in English, and even though I had visited Austin before, previously, and even though I had access to, I could understand the humor in certain sitcoms like Seinfeld, who a lot of people might not even know what that sitcom is. I had access to all that, but still the moving to this country and engaging in a PhD program in this country and working part-time in this country was a complete cultural shock, right? So it is a given. Cultural differences exist in every workplace, right? Whether it's a mid-sized organization or it's a big transnational company, we're going to have these cultural clashes nowadays more than ever. Technology advances, transportation advances are impacting how we connect with everyone around the world. We really live in a global village, and that is going to bring all these different cultures in contact, and is going to bring clashes, cultural clashes, right? So there is. We know a lot about this. We've seen it. We experience it. There are all these different cultures when they're in contact can bring all these tensions, and they can impact everything. So if you think about every single thing that we do, within our organization, think about every single process, whether it is evaluations, performance, whether they're meetings, whether they're hiring, questioning, debating every single aspect, process, concept that we see in an organization, very likely can be understood in very different ways in another part of the world, through another culture. So what we understand as obvious, something that think about professionalism, for example, right? That we believe that we have an understanding that we all share, right? That sometimes people think that is universal. It is absolutely not, because there might be someone in your team who comes from a culture that has a complete and opposite idea of what you believe professionalism should look like. So all these different ways of being, ways of living, ways of doing are definitely going to impact the workplace.
Yeah, I think you just painted the picture. So I think it's, working with clients, and for years we've talked about the business imperative and the creativity and all the wonderful things that come when we bring in, and we recruit and we bring in and we nurture diversity in the workplace. But we haven't really talked about it's a hill to climb. There are a lot of challenges, right? So what are your thoughts about how, how do we manage, what are your thoughts about kind of managing all that in the workplace? And also, what are the implications for bringing all these different cultures into the workplace that, as you said, in many ways clash? And by the way, I think the professionalism is a perfect example for the subjectivity of what we're asking for in our workplace. So, yeah, I think I just spilled a whole bunch of there. But what are your thoughts about how to best manage all that?
So first, I think we have to understand that is an acquired skill, right? We are not inherently or we are not born with a skill of understanding difference, right? So our first approach is going to be like to categorize, right? To set aside anything that is different to us, because that's how we have been built, right? As human beings, in a way to protect ourselves, in a way to survive, right? So we have that skill, that we have those instincts, right? So we have to keep that in mind. That it's not going to be natural. It's an acquired taste, an acquired skill. So we first need to understand that we need to be very aware of that. That is that those differences are going to be there, right? We have to be aware of that. Some people, I still see a lot of people that are expecting people to believe the same way that they believe, right? I always say that I live in a world of, I just don't get it. I just don't get it. Why, when they raise their hands, it's like, how can they be different? And I'm not talking about being mean or being aggressive. I'm just talking about having these differences in terms of how to act, how to celebrate a birthday, how to run a meeting, all these differences that people need to expect. And that's what I always talk about. Differences at this point should be expected, not only tolerated. That is a very important point. We need to understand, be aware that yes, very likely we're going to have these differences, and we need to learn how to deal with them by being aware that they exist to begin with, right? And understanding also that there are a lot of benefits about that diversity. Like you said, we've heard about how diverse teams are more creative, how diverse teams can be more productive, more efficient. But that is a learning curve. That's a
Yes.
learning curve, right? So we need to first keep that as a goal, understanding that, yeah, there's research that proves that this diversity can be very beneficial for the organization, but that we're going to have to promote it and we're going to have to leverage it, right? That is not going to be automatic. So when we have that goal and we understand that the differences are going to be there, that they're a given, so then that kind of says, okay, then I can do more about this. I can really learn how to deal with this diversity, because really diversity is going to make us smarter. It's going to make us work better, because it forces us to expect new ideas. Like I said, it forces us to be better with our communication skills, because we're going to have to communicate points to people who do not believe the same way as we do, right? So all this diversity really makes us smarter. I always say that.
Mm-hmm. That's brilliant. Yeah, that's absolutely. Yeah, and I'm gonna jump to the assumption that folks who are listening or who are seeing this already, that they do believe that ultimately diversity is not only the right thing, but it's the smart thing to do to bring into our organization for all those reasons that you put out there. It's the practicality of it is where it gets kind of sticky, right? So yeah, I'm thinking about a client now that I'm working with, and they're trying very hard to. It's a manager and her direct report, and they're coming at the work that they're doing and the work ethic coming from very different places based on their cultural backgrounds. And so it's becoming a little bit sticky. We're trying to figure out how to manage that. But what are your thoughts about how to mitigate the clashes and the differences and all the stuff that happens on that learning curve?
So I think about several ways, several things that we can do, right? First is, like I said, awareness, knowledge, build your knowledge, right? There is a learning component, right? You don't have to go and learn all the laundry list of the characteristics for every single culture, but you need to at least understand the dimensions or the ways that cultures are different, right? So you need to have that knowledge. You need to understand that. You need to understand that culture is playing a role in those clashes, right? So you need to be aware that, I mean, I would imagine that a leader who wants to be more culturally competent is going to be able to say, well, I understand that communication takes place in different ways across cultures. So I'm going to learn about this person's specific communication skills, right? So that is one thing, knowledge. We have to learn. There is no other way around it, right? We have to be mindful also, mindful with a component of emotional intelligence. We have to be aware of our reactions, because if we cannot control it, we cannot be aware, we cannot say, okay, there comes a reaction, right? We cannot move forward, right? So it's like emotional intelligence. Be aware of your reactions. Be aware of the expressions that other people are using, the tone of voice. Be aware of, like, okay, try to see beyond more than what is just apparent right there in front of you, right? Try to expand your view, your vision, to understand, okay, what about the tone of voice or the body language? There has to be more info that I can get input, right? So that's another thing. And the third one thing that I like is this idea of truly connecting, right? And that's where we really struggle, like asking and listening truly in a very respectful way. So you learn something about the way cultures can be different when you were developing your knowledge. That was the first thing I said. You are in control of your emotions and your reactions, right? You are being more mindful. You are not reacting. You are kind of taking some time. And I always say that what's important is your second thought and your first action, right? Let the first thought come and go. Let that first thought come and go. Then have a more educated second thought, and then act on that second thought, right? I always say that. So knowledge, mindfulness, and then try to have some skills in terms of relating to individuals. And I think regardless of culture or even within culture, that relating, that interacting, that getting to know the other person, right, is difficult. The world that we live in is a world we are still to a great degree trying to survive, right? And we believe sometimes in certain cultures, right, that we have to do it against others instead of with others. So I always help leaders ask the questions, right? Like, take the time to capture one question that you can really get closer to the other person, right? If you're willing to do that, right? It's like, uh, try to see beyond what you just see, right? Like a question that I always use, for example, is, what about your lived experience is important for me to understand so we can work together efficiently? So questions like that, right? Is like, and what is working for you, what is not working for you. It's not that one culture has to win over the other or one way of doing things has to win over the other. It's just that first step of reaching out, connecting, and listening. And again, they're all related, because when it's time to listen, we have to go on, take our emotional intelligence. So we are really listening. We are careful not to make judgments, careful not to compare to me, right? So it's all those skills that you really need to practice, because all those are like muscles. You practice them, you develop them, right? Uh, Always thinking that all those things that you are doing are going to have a beneficial impact on the organization, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like that. That's the three steps of first knowing a bit about the culture, the background, right? So that's almost the academic part, right? And I want to
Mhm.
come back to that in a second. And then the second is to do the work of knowing thyself and be mindful of your own. Where are you in terms of your own emotional intelligence, right? And being honest about that. And then thirdly, I think of it as closing the gap. So how can I best relate with you who are different? And I know a little bit about you, but what's the skill set? What's the muscle that I can build for relating with the other? Period.
The other, and we have to also keep in mind, Danny, that when we people react to behavior, right? Like, oh my god, he did this, oh my goodness, they did this, right? So that is the behavior is what causes the oh, right. And sometimes, and I've experienced it myself, sometimes it hits you and you end up with a hole in your stomach. You're like, I cannot believe they did this. I cannot believe
Yeah.
they screamed. I cannot believe they slap on the table. I cannot believe you're like, so that is a very important reaction. We have to keep that in mind. So when we react to that, is behavior is because of something, right? There's always a reason for the behavior. We are talking now in terms of culture, cultural reasons behind behavior, but also we cannot only understand people based on their culture. There are different mental programming that are going to impact our behaviors. We can talk about a deep universal mental programming in terms of the things that we all humans need to do, like nurture our young or protect our territory or the sex drive, hunger. So all those are universal things that we all have, right? And then we have less deep, way more shallow are individual personalities, right? We are those are learned, and here those kind of like we are more of an introvert, more of an extrovert, right? So that's kind of personality that can also be very unique to yourself. But then we have the cultural programming, the kind of the middle between those two that also impacts a lot of our behaviors. But once we understand all those different levels of mental programming, you can see the person and ask like, okay, what about behaviors is part of that culture that I can learn, right? I can learn about, I can ask respectfully, but there has to be something also that makes him a human being, makes him or her a human being. Maybe I can find common ground in there, because we know we have these more biological things, right? There has to be more there that we can find common ground. And also I can also accept that a lot of the behavior might come from personality, maybe nothing to do with culture, right? But once we understand that, once we are able to question the behavior, also ask why, what is there behind that behavior, can create we can move away from stereotypes and categorizations to a more individual understanding of that person.
Yeah, more holistic. Yeah. Yeah. So Dr. Alejandra, what do you think of all that's great if so I'm manager, leader, organization, right? Caught in between a rock and a hard place, pressure from the above, and I would like to get to I have a team of 5. All this, I don't know if I have the time or the bandwidth to do all this with each person. What's your response to that? That's a lot of work.
That's a lot of work, but I think sometimes it's not as much as you think. But yes, you might not. I think there's always opportunity to begin like on your one-on-ones conversations with a quick check-in. So quick check-in. You're not going to write a dissertation about each of your people in your team, right? But a quick kind of a check-in is like, okay, uh, what about your life experience? What's working well? What is not working well, right? So just kind of having those quick conversations, that's going to be enough. But also you can set up the mood in any kind of group setting where you can model understanding, asking questions, learning, right? So there is ways, and I've seen it beautifully done in meetings, right? When there's, for example, there is the leader of the meeting becomes a different person in each meeting, right? And is an instance that each leader begins telling a little bit about one important um, growth that that person had the previous month, right? Or something like that, which can be one sentence, one phrase. So that just by the role changing, right, you open opportunities, you give access to others to have the floor, right? So there are little things like that that you can make, right? I think there's a lot of about
Yeah.
modeling, also you sharing about yourself, right? And also you sharing about your knowledge, what you have learned also, right? And yes, understanding and maybe having little decisions, right? That okay, I'm not giving into assumptions, right? It's like do not assume that everyone can go to happy hour. Do not assume that everyone can work on Saturdays. Do not assume that everyone. No, let's say, okay, what about this? What about this works for some people? What about doesn't work for other people? And the people will be compromising. Everyone will compromise at a certain point, right? Some might be sometimes when some things work for certain people and others when they don't, right? So but by that openness about talking about decisions, about how does everyone think about this and that, asking those questions, and like I said, it doesn't have to be like a whole 2-hour interview, but just having the practice of developing your questions and asking them maybe once every month, right? Or once every 2 months or something in a way that is feasible for you, for your specific situation.
I like this. Yeah. So it doesn't have to be complicated, nor does it have to be all encompassing. It's
Mhm.
about staying curious, legitimately curious, being humble, I think, being humble, and that there are different ways of doing work. Like you said, different ways of thinking about professionalism, and I actually think I don't know what you're thinking, but, given everything that's happened with essentially us are moving to, by and large, a hybrid work environment in most situations, that we're rethinking how we work. We're rethinking productivity. We're rethinking work ethic. We're rethinking values. We're rethinking culture. So this is I think it's an exciting time to be a sponge, right? And to say, okay, I just hired Dr. Alejandra. She's coming with a very strong cultural background. I've got my strong cultural background. Instead of thinking of it as a clash, let's think of it as an opportunity, right? To be
Exactly.
curious, to say, how can we do this together? How can we think about this new way of working together?
Exactly. And I also always talk about how we have to remember that whatever it is that you do every day, you're going to get very good at it, right?
Mm. Yeah,
Is
yeah.
excellent practice. So if you do something every day, you're going to get very good at it. So if you have continually a space to think about those things, like the ones that you mentioned, right? To question everything, like question, like, okay, let me make sure that today I develop the habit of questioning things, decisions. Are this the right for everyone? Well, how can this be seen from another perspective? Who can give us some more feedback on how this can lay on other people? So, but if you develop that habit, it will become a habit. I mean, you develop that, and then you will be very good because you did it every day, right? You got a lot of practice. You're going to be very good at identifying patterns, right? And once you start seeing the world in different ways, then you can that's something that will never leave you, right? I go to any single place, and my first four questions is who's here, who's not here, who's speaking, who's not speaking, who's been heard, who's not been heard, right? I think there were six, not four. But I ask this all the time. If I'm in the supermarket, if I'm in this meeting, if I'm in a call, if I'm in a music festival, if I'm in a museum, who's here, who's not here, who's speaking, who's not speaking, who's been heard and who's not heard, right? So you develop that practice and then it becomes automatic, and then everything you will do will have that. Now, sometimes it's going to be very uncomfortable. It is way easier to stay in the known, in the familiar, right? And whenever I go back to my home country, Mexico, believe me, I rest because it is so much easier just to really getting very soft landing into my group, right? Because it's work and effort to be constantly learning and asking. But that is the way the world is going to be now. As we become more and more and more diverse, it's going to be like that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. Dr. Alejandra, I want to, as we're starting to wrap up here, are there resources or tools? I mean, we put in some great mindset things and also the importance of asking questions and staying curious. But are there any other tools or strategies or resources that you would recommend to my listeners?
Yeah, there is a couple of books that I use a lot, and I think they are essential for any leader who wants to be more culturally intelligent or cultural aware, right? There is an author, David Livermore, and his book is Leading with Cultural Intelligence. Michael Landers has another book called Culture Crossing, and David C. Thomas has another book called Cultural Intelligence, right? So there are all. I love those books. They are very they have a lot of examples, and they have a lot of very specific ways around these issues of develop your knowledge, develop your mindfulness, right, and develop some skills to talk to people, right. To they all of those people talk about also develop your tolerance for ambiguity, right. That's another skill that we have to develop, right. It's like, oh, I don't know, that knowledge of I don't know, that things are not clear. Even tolerating that is as a skill that when we are faced with all this difference is going to be an important skill. So they have great ideas there.
That's great. Yeah. And thank you I was actually thinking that earlier. Yeah. The comfort with ambiguity, which has always been a critical leadership competency. But I think you're right, is even more important now than ever, right? To nurture that notion of instability is a good place to be. It also makes us really nimble because we can move really quickly.
Yeah.
And there's another concept I wanted to throw in here that I think it's from my organizational development master's degree preparation. We talked about equifinality, this term of equifinality, meaning that there are multiple ways to get to the same solution.
Exactly.
Right. So to be comfortable with ambiguity and to nurture equifinality, right. And to know that there are different ways. So, I think it's interesting because we're right in the throes of it, but I think we'll ultimately end up with, what are our work outcomes and objectives that we have now? Person from this culture, person from this culture. How are you going to get there? And how can we figure this out together?
And I think and I think for me, if I could have more people understand that what is obvious to you is only obvious to you, right? I mean, if that would be one of my first goals in life, right? Like understand that your point of view, your perspective is only belongs to you, right? So that is the first step, right? And then it all becomes this habit of asking questions, right? It's like, when is the last time that you read a book from an author that was not an American author or a Western author, a TV show, a museum? And it's difficult. It's easy to say, go and learn about other cultures, but it's not that easy to do because it requires the effort, the uncomfortableness. What am I going to be doing, reading or watching a Japanese movie or something?
Right.
So it's an effort for some people like me who who have come to the country, we have two countries and we move back and forth, it becomes the way to survive, right? Because there's no other way. I have to be moving between cultures. I have to be here and there at the same time. But if you don't have access to that, make yourself have access to that in one way or another, right? It will it will sharpen your skills to understand that there are different ways of living that you cannot even believe. And one more last thing, some of those differences are very stark, they're very obvious, right? And others are very nuanced, right? And sometimes we cannot pinpoint it, like, why did I have this reaction? What is it? And sometimes those differences are nuanced. You also have to be don't always expect the big gigantic difference. Sometimes we're talking about very nuanced things.
Yeah, that's what makes it, I think, very exciting. Complicated, but very exciting too. Out of those three titles, is there one that you would recommend over or first as the first read? I want to give folks a tangible thing to do immediately after they get off this podcast.
There is oh my, I love them three. I Lead In with Cultural Intelligence by David Livermore is also a good one. There are a lot of articles on Harvard Business Review that talk about cultural differences. There's one that I'm just thinking about now, what leadership looks like in different cultures, because people lead, right? Some people lead by example, some people lead by consensus, some people lead by, no, there's no consensus, you're going to do what I do. And it's all different across cultures. So for me, it's a fascinating topic. For me, of course, I want to go and absorb and understand anthropologically how every group behaves, right? So it's fascinating. Once you start opening that, you're like, oh, okay, there are many ways of being. And that does not mean that the product or the process won't be completed. It just means that you have to open your mind, your vision to allow differences and learn how to manage them, right?
Yes. Yeah, I think it's going to be my new favorite expression is WWDAD. What would Dr. Alejandra do right now? Right? WWDAD, right? And I think the answer is always be quiet, ask questions, absorb, grow, be willing to keep moving forward, keep growing.
And if I can say one more thing, okay, I can speak about this for the whole day.
Yeah, I know, it's true.
We also have to understand that there are certain culture scripts, like we said, that mental programming about a culture, right, that make different people from different cultures behave differently, right? But we have to understand also where we're coming from. And I'm going to talk about the US, right? Because I work in the US, I live in the US, and the US as a culture does not have that need to learn about other cultures because they've always been a superpower.
It's a really good point. Yeah.
So they have been a superpower. They dominate, right? They save people. They have those cultural scripts when nothing pushes the US as a culture to learn about other cultures, to try to understand. So keep that in mind too, right? That you have to go over that hump because nothing in your culture is going to push you to learn. On the other hand, in other cultures like Mexico, that we have to survive and we have to learn about the US and how the US does things because we are some point, or we had been at many points dependent on them, we have always to be learning. I had to learn English as soon as possible. It was my way to success. It's so different. So I did not have to go over that hump because I needed, as a Mexican national, to learn about the US, for example, when that does not happen in the US. So keep that in mind, because when you feel the resistance, it's like that, even that is culture. That is people are not used to learning and are not used to, so people are afraid of visiting other countries, going out of the US. So it's important to keep that in mind. And it all goes back to knowledge, right? Learn about cultures, including yourself, including your own culture.
I love that. Yeah. Knowledge and to stay curious. Yeah. And to recognize it's not, I love what you just said, that it doesn't, it's not supported, encouraged, required the way it is in other cultures. U.S. aside, right? It's. I mean, I hate that it's coming from this place of power and privilege, but that's exactly where it's coming from. But the world is shifting, right? I mean, it was wrong before, but now it's even more wrong to stay in that place of we're alone on this. Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, listen, I know we could talk forever on this. I hope we'll continue this conversation at another time. But thank you so much, Dr. Holland. What's the best way that folks can get in your universe and be in contact with you?
Oh, please do. I love making friends. I do love making friends. I'm in LinkedIn. I'm quite active. Well, to some degree in LinkedIn. I love making friends there. And just my name, Alejandra Mielke. There are not a lot of Mielkes. It's a German last name, so it's easy to find. And I'm also, like Danny said at the beginning, I'm one of the co-founders of El Puente Institute, where we do a lot of work around ensuring that our workplaces are ready to develop Latino talent, right? So they have these cross-cultural skills that we were talking about, so they can become great places for Latino talent. And we also provide leadership development to the Latina, Latinx individuals. So we have a page in LinkedIn, El Puente Institute in LinkedIn. So follow us there. And my email is Alejandra, my name, my first name, at alejandramilke.com. And I'm always in front of my computer. So I can read emails and reply to you. I'll be happy to get in touch with anyone. Thank you.
Well, you heard it here, folks. So Dr. Alejandra is personally inviting you to be in contact with her. So, and I certainly hope you will. Dr. Alejandra, thank you so much. This has been really, really wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about this. Thank you very much.
You bet. You bet. And thank you, dear listener. This is Danny Ceballos with Unleashed Consulting and the Best Boss Bootcamp podcast. We'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody. Bye now.